I'm Big Red Martin, the Astro Meathead. Welcome back. You know, I have to give it to anyone who successfully creates YouTube videos on a regular basis. This is work. I thought I could just slap something together and crank it out. I did make some attempt at a video last week and it went horribly awry. I broke most of the rules that I set for myself for making this channel. It was simple. This channel is for beginners in astrophotography. I was not going to make assumptions that the viewers knew anything at all about photography, processing, or even astronomy. When I was starting out, every video I watched, whether intentional or not, seemed to make assumptions that I had a knowledge base in some respects of the workflow. The reality was, I did not. So I decided to make a series of videos that do not make assumptions of the knowledge base of my audience, but rather build a ground-up understanding of astrophotography. I'm going to try to give the most budget-minded instruction where I can so as to make it more palatable to the beginner. Keep in mind that I'm new to this as well, so we'll be learning together as we all progress. So here's a rundown of some of the basic kit we'll need to get started. First is the obvious, a camera. Any DSLR or mirrorless digital camera will do as long as it has a few necessary features. First, it should be a camera body that accepts interchangeable lenses. Sorry, no point and shoots. Second, it must have the ability to shoot manual mode with manual focusing. Third, it must have the ability to save the files in camera raw. Most do. Pretty much any DSLR digital camera that you own right now will work, as long as they meet those basic criteria. Digital cameras come in several configurations and all use the same basic technology, a CMOS sensor. These sensors come in several sizes, and that's their main difference. Full frame, the equivalent to the old 35mm film size, APS-C or crop sensor, and many of the newer mirrorless cameras use a smaller micro Four Thirds processor. Each of the smaller sensors takes a photograph that has a smaller footprint of the field of view. The ratio of the smaller footprint is known as the crop factor. A Canon APS-C sensor, for instance, has a crop factor of 1.6 times smaller than a full-frame sensor. 1.5 smaller for Nikon and Sony. This means a slightly tighter shot will be taken with the same sensor. Don't let this confuse you. You'll have a beautiful image of the night sky. When the sensor size matters most is choosing the correct focal length for the frame to frame the object that you want to shoot. Generally, advertised focal lengths on lenses are based on full-frame cameras. For instance, 100mm lenses on an APS-C Canon is 160 millimeters with a 1.6 crop. Deep sky objects will take a bit of research and planning to get properly framed up, and we'll look at this as we get set up and plan our session in a later video. Now let's go over some of the settings for your camera. First, roll that top dial over to the M position. You'll want to make sure that your lens is set for manual focus as well. Don't be scared. Remember that your camera was designed around daytime photography. Autofocus, exposure compensation, and image stabilization were all designed for shooting well-lit objects and actions. Next, you'll want to make sure to turn off any image stabilization in the camera or on the lens. Canon's all on the lens, but other manufacturers may vary. You won't need this feature. You're going to be steady on a tripod and plenty stable. Now we're going into the camera settings and finding long exposure compensation. Turn this off. I know that sounds counterintuitive as we'll be shooting long exposures, but again, this feature was meant for better lit subjects and won't do us any good at night. I'll go over the ISO and aperture settings as well as the mirror lockup feature when we get set up for our session in a future video. They're directly relatable then, but only abstract notions right now. Again, make sure your camera is saving files in a RAW format. If your camera allows for saving both JPEG and RAW, turn this off in favor of RAW only. It'll save the memory buffer space and make your session run much more smoothly. A side note, if you're planning on buying a camera for astrophotography and are on a budget, look to APS-C DSLR bodies. Full-frame DSLR and mirrorless cameras generally cost in the thousands, And some of the Micro Four Thirds mirrorless cameras have great features and are smaller and lighter, but the small sensor limits their use for super wide field shots. Entry DSLRs like the Canon Rebel series or Nikon D3500 are good, solid choices that won't break the bank. Stay away from those big, huge mega kits with everything but the kitchen sink on Amazon. The extras you get are typically cheap junk. Your best bet is a single lens kit, or even better, a body only, and then buy a decent lens to go with it, as kit lenses can leave a bit to be desired. Watch out as well that it's not a foreign market camera common on Amazon. Check to see if your warranty is serviceable where you live. Don't be afraid to buy used either. My Canon 80D here was purchased from a friend for under 500 bucks. Rebel T3i to T7i, 60D to 90D, they're all great choices. Things I would look out are flip out screens, which are great when your camera's pointed at the night sky, and a wireless capability like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. And sorry I'm only listing Canon cameras, they are what I know. I'm sure some research could steer you towards a suitable Nikon or Sony. Next, we'll look at another absolutely essential piece of kit, the tripod. Personally, I would not skimp here. Heavy-duty aluminum or carbon fiber will be the best. Don't pay 50 bucks for the Amazon or the big box store light aluminum or plastic jobby. It won't do you at all. I use the Manfrotto Be Free. There are knockoffs available, and there are also other good tripods available at this price point. One thing I would look for is about a 25-pound payload capacity, and that'll fit the bill just fine. Like I said, Amazon does sell a knockoff from K&H, I think. Looks fairly stout at a lower price point. I have no experience with it, but it has some pretty good reviews. Up next is an intervalometer. It allows you to program a series of long exposures and control your camera. It can also be used as a remote shutter release, allowing you to trigger your camera without actually touching it. While not absolutely essential, it's very handy and a very versatile tool. This one cost me about 20 bucks. The last piece of equipment we'll look at is a star tracker. It's essentially a camera mount that does exactly what the name implies. Remember that the Earth rotates a set speed. The tracker rotates in the opposite direction along the equatorial axis of the Earth to compensate, so that the stars appear still to the camera. This ensures that the picture you're taking has that streak-free star shot. Now, you don't absolutely need a star tracker. You could take a long series of shorter exposures using what's called the 500 rule for astrophotography. It basically dictates that your shutter speed needs to be 500 divided by the focal length of your lens. In the case of our 100mm lens from earlier, that would be 5 seconds on a full-frame camera. Around 3 seconds for the crop sensor because of the smaller crop factor. A few thousand shots might get you some usable data on some of the dimmer deep sky objects. Back to the tracking lens. Star trackers come in several flavors, from build-it-yourself fully manual barn door trackers to fairly sophisticated Wi-Fi enabled trackers. The electronic trackers come both in mini and full-size variants, the main difference being payload capacities. Most of the mini rigs will handle in the neighborhood of 5 pounds of gear maxed out. This sounds just right for a camera body and lens, right? I'd lean towards the bigger rigs though. If you're only taking wide field images of the Milky Way or entire constellations or regions, the mini tracker would be just right. If you decide to get a bit more deeper down our little rabbit hole and start adding bigger lenses, auto-guiding scopes, cameras, even a small refractor telescope, that mini turns into a very expensive paperweight. The larger trackers have the ability to push around 11 pounds of payload. I chose the Skywatcher Star Adventurer Plus 2i kit. It came with the wedge mount, the declination bracket with counterweight. We'll discuss these in your setup video later. It's Wi-Fi enabled, it's app controlled. I can control the mount with my phone, and it can control the camera through the app. It didn't break the bank either at about $450 when I purchased it. Ioptron is another manufacturer that produces a good mount in this range. So there you have it, a rundown basic rig you might use to get started in astrophotography. in my very loud neighborhood. In the next video, I'm going to go over some of the software that I use to plan my sessions, figure out my framing, stack the series of pictures, and process the final image. Best of all, they're all free. We'll go over setting up everything we talked about today and getting ready for a session. If you have any questions, ask away in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Please be nice, I'm new at this. As always, clear skies, heavy weights.